minutes later, and just, did you know? She said, do you know that Erin was in an accident? I said, yes, I knew that. Well, where is she, you know? And I just told her that Erin had not survived the accident and that she was probably in heaven with God. And okay, she said. And she walked down the hall and she turned around and she said, you know, that means I can have all the toys, doesn't it? And in the next second she said, but you know, I really don't want them all. I said, no, I know. And then it was, she went to a place of, you know, well, I hope there's a bathroom in heaven, and does he have a telephone? Those were her two questions.
Wow.
Yeah.
How she processed it.
Yes. And does he know? Does he know? She said that she's my best friend too. She's not just my sister.
Wow. That's amazing how kids process things.
It is. And
it's got to be heartbreaking to see that, though, at the time.
Well, it was on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, it was enlightening to me because she made it clear to me of what she, you know, what she had lost. Her sister, her best friend, that probably would not have come to me without that piece and the piece I write about in the book.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So going forward again to how, you know, how did she do in the months and, you know, the early stages and going forward?
Probably better than her mom and dad.
Right.
And children are very resilient. They know how to put things into perspective really quickly and very simply.
Sure.
And if we can just be smart enough to hear it.
Makes a lot of difference.
It does.
So I guess leading into the next part, I mean, nobody can imagine the grief that you and your husband each had, but you had to share that grief. And
yes.
How did that affect you, you as a couple?
As a couple, and I write about, actually in that same chapter, maintaining a fluent family, that part comes up. Because what I've learned is that everyone's loss is very specific to them, because each of us had a relationship with Erin, and right. Erin revealed a certain piece of herself to each of us, but none of us saw the same piece. So therefore the losses are all very significant, and they're all very individual, both within the family unit and, you know, on a person-to-person basis. So to be able to support each other in that is a difficult journey. I think the key
right.
to that is to recognize
your lens is not their lens necessarily.
That's right.
No, and I can, you know, my father passed away this past summer, and, you know, I dealt with it very different than my sister than did my mother, because it was all different, and it's tough to understand, you know, well, why aren't you crying? Well, why are you crying?
Yes.
That's,
yeah.
Did it affect your relationship in the long run?
Yes, it did.
Personal?
Yes. It affected our social network immediately. People that we would have been friends with or socialized with who had friends, who had children who were friends with Erin, began to drop off the radar. And not because of who we are, just where we were.
Just the circumstance and how you knew them.
Yes.
Okay, time for another break, and we'll come back. I want to get into the rebuilding and the growth and the sharing that you've done, which is amazing.
Okay.
Back in just a second on Doc Talk. Welcome back to Doc Talk. Dr. John Gillis with Deborah Anthony. Again, back to this, you know, very moving and touching and provocative story of what you've gone through since you lost your little girl in '84. We've talked about what happened then, some of the aftermath with your daughter and your husband, but then it's still back to you. You know, here you are a year later, 2 years later, whatever it may be, and your life has changed. What do you do then? How did you handle that?
Well, I didn't know how I was handling it at the time. You know, it was only later when I went to write the book and was able to reflect back on that whole process because I was probably 10 to 15 years recapturing my joy of life and restoring happiness. And what I know I had to do, and what I did, I only know it now though, remember, I didn't know it when I was in it, is that you actually have to go through a recreation process, and you simply are not who you were. You can't go back to who you were. So it's like a reformatting of yourself, and everyone else has to do the same thing.
And the world around you has to adjust to that reformat.
Yes, I think one of the biggest challenges for what I call the outside world folks, which are the people who want to support those who are grieving,
Right.
but who really are not comfortable with that and probably have a lot of fear attached to that.
Mm-hmm.
They also should recognize that the person they knew is no more. So therefore, the communication methods that they used to connect with that person will no longer apply and will no longer work. And sometimes just being aware of that can erase a lot of the chaos and conflict that exists for people when they're they don't feel like they're getting through, and that's because it's a
Right.
different
It's a different channel.
Yes.
And the frustration comes from that both ways.
Yes, absolutely.
That's fair. As you started to get back to things, what did you go back to work? Did you go back to activities? How did it sort of? I know you didn't realize it at the time, but in hindsight, how did you do it?
Well, the first thing I did was get rid of the question that was running through my mind was when is it socially appropriate for me to go back to my activities, go back to work? What is the protocol around that? I struggled with that because sometimes you do what your heart is telling you to do, and the world is saying, oh no, not yet, or
And vice versa.
And vice versa. So I just decided when it feels right for me. That was and I went back to work, and the re-entering the world is another chapter in the book, when you're ready to do that stepping out piece. And I love truth, I'm a truth girl, and honesty has always been my safest route and the quickest.
Sometimes hard when people
Yes.
don't say the right thing.
That's right.
We only have about 2.5 minutes left, and I really want to focus on the goals of this book. I mean, a lot of emotion, a lot of history has gone into this book. Why did you write it, and what did you and are you doing with it?
I wrote it because I was not seeing bereaved parents recapturing their joy of life over the course of 20 plus years. I wrote it to support them in their grief process, and I wrote it to help bring some awareness to the outside world folks, and to try and bridge the gap. There's a huge gap, I believe, that exists between those in pain and those trying to support those in pain.
Okay, so as you produced the book, how has it helped? How has it gotten out there?
Well, when I first published it, I put it out into the bookstores. I've kind of backed away from that, and I put it where in my heart I believe it needs to be. So that would be funeral homes, victim services in the policing community. I'm working with getting it to the military for all of their families of people that are not coming back home under their own steam, unfortunately. And I gift a lot of them when I see a certain story, or like the little boy in Cape Breton that passed away. I'll be sending copies to both his parents. I send them a lot. It's gone to a lot of places. New Zealand,
Wow.
across the country. A lot of people gift it.
But you mentioned it may help people who may not have lost someone themselves but know somebody, and to help them understand. Has that been important?
Yes, it's a wonderful gift item, and it's a win-win for both.
So you could just tell us, if people want to get a copy of the book or learn more, what's your website again?
They could go to www.recapturingthejoy.com, or they could call me, 865-6069.
Very good. Well, listen, I can't thank you enough for sharing this very personal it's tough to do this, and I admire you for it. To all our viewers out there, thank you for being here, and look out for your loved ones and anyone who may have lost a loved one. And thank you for being here, and see you soon on Doc Talk.